Welcome back to another episode of the Agents to Owners podcast. I am really looking forward to today's episode. I have Adam Czerwinski of Sidebar Insurance Solutions out of Orland Park, Illinois. Adam left a career as an attorney on purpose to get into the insurance agency. I think I have that right. So I'm really interested in hearing Adam's backstory. So without further ado, welcome to the show. Adam, I appreciate you being here.
Greetings, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. So let's get right into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you found your way into the insurance industry?
Yeah, thanks for, first off, thanks for having me. Super excited about it, to have the conversation. I know we talked a couple of years ago, so it's good to rekindle.
Yeah.
So a little bit about me. So I'm a Chicago boy, born and raised on the North Side. Left for a little bit to go to college in Indiana, and then came back and went to law school. Practiced law for about 10 years. So I was litigating cases on the first hand to defend insureds from lawsuits. So I was retained counsel, and then I proceeded to be hired by a personal injury workers' comp firm to prosecute injuries. So we were helping the injured people recover against the policies we now sell. And then while I was there, I was hired by Uber to help manage their litigation. But the most important part of my life, obviously family and kids and everything else, kind of, led me to a situation where time is finite and you can do anything, but you can't necessarily do everything.
Yeah.
And so came to a decision of like, look, I caught the entrepreneurial bug when I was at Uber. I have some really fantastic business owners and business acumen and minds in that space. And I love talking about those things, and maybe not as much about so it kind of inspired me. I love the law. I love things about it, but I loved the entrepreneurial piece more. I felt more of a draw to that. And so I ended up leaving Uber and saying, I want to run and manage my own thing. And, I didn't necessarily want to go back to doing the legal work that I had done before. Because I knew how hard it was to start, the cash flow needs and everything else. And so I was like, what can I do that's cash effective, allows me to use my skills that I learned through 10 years of litigating over insurance claims, and allows me also to be autonomous and be like, I can coach my kids' baseball team, be at every dance recital, and still at the same time kind of build something that I can sell, grow, and find some value in. And that's and that led me to insurance, because the reality was 99% of my clients, whether I was defending them or suing on their behalf, had no idea what their policy talked about.
Yeah.
Had no idea the coverages that, and what they should have or why they should have it or what it did. They basically would walk in with a dusty envelope and say, here's my policy. What can I do? And, the average policy in Illinois right now is obviously going up in price, but generally, it's about $1,000 a home and maybe $800 a year per car. Well, there you have it. Tell me something you pay $1,800 a year for and don't know what it does. And so that struck me as a whole and a great place for us to start a business.
So did you have any contacts? I know that you had, on the law side of things, you obviously dealt so much with the insurance industry, the insurance companies, the insurance policies. Did you have any contacts in the insurance space to hear, what it was like on the, on the agent side of things?
No, that's the reality is no. I mean, the short answer was no. I had talked to a number of people who had warned me off and told me what a grind it was, right? Who were like financial advisors that I was friendly with, that were like, look, man, these guys, all the insurance guys I know are just grinding and miserable and frustrated, and they don't make that much per transaction. And I was like, yeah, that's them. But I think a little bit of my optimism and my naivete are what led me down the path. And the reality is it's actually been really pleasant. I've met some great people like yourself and others in IAOA, as well as in Canyonlands, which is the group that I affiliate with. And look, we have there is a little bit of Eeyore in all of us insurance agents, where we kind of get down on ourselves or maybe the industry. But the reality is that we're very fortunate that we can drive a business that has recurring income. We can advise and have control over the hours, develop relationships. So that was one thing I missed out on, is I never developed relationships with my clients more than their case. And we can develop relationships over years with these people and get to know them, their kids. So it's a really cool kind of inspiring business where you can derive actual income and growth year over year over year and maintain relationships. That doesn't exist in many other industries.
Yeah.
But admittedly, no, I literally went into this fairly blind, and I did research. I did build a project. I built up forecasts. I did all that kind of thing from a business perspective, but I did not have any like brother, cousin, uncle who did insurance to be like, to see the back office of it.
And it's, did you do much research into captive versus independent and what the difference was and because most of the time people that start their insurance career, unless they have a job in the independent side, start on the captive side.
Yeah,
so
no.
How did you come to the independent channel? How'd you land on that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So there was really a couple of reasons. So I did talk to captives. Like I had conversations with a number of different carriers about becoming, and I went several rounds with a couple of them. But the reality is that I felt two things were very important to me. One, I had to have independence and options. I had to know that what my ultimate goal here is that I needed to be able to deliver what the client needed, not just what I needed them to do to be with me. And I felt like the captive was a little restrictive in that. And the second thing that really drove me is differentiation. So there was the independence of, I can do what's best for the client. I can find them the best policy. I can find them the best, what I felt the best value was. And in some cases, tell them they have the best value and not to come with me. Because that's one of the things I learned as a lawyer. Sometimes you have to say, no, like I can't represent you, right? Is that discretion is the better part of honor. And so you just have to turn it down. And I wanted to be able to say that from an independent standpoint. You don't have to be with one carrier to be with me. But the second thing was actually an anecdote that stuck with me. We have a family member who is who runs a business, and they were doing a specific product offering, and they had spun it off. And this product offer had made them very famous and had big impacts. And he took the product and he goes, look, this is mine, and here's the competitor. Tell me the difference. And if you can't tell the difference, then it's just about price. There's nothing that you can do that differentiates you in the marketplace. The relationship turns out to ultimately be one driven on cost. And that's a race to the bottom that I don't want to be a part of. Whereas if in the independent space, we can really offer options, right? We can offer differentiation. We can give the extra things. I mean, whether it's we throw in glass deductibles, or we can able to add businesses to cars, right? With professional service industry offerings, which I service a lot. That's a big difference, right? We can offer uninsured and underinsured motorists on umbrella policy. We can offer and differentiate between our product offerings and such that we become a very important part of the process. And in that world, we can really be a differentiator, and we can ultimately then win out. Whereas, if I were to go with a captive agent, and there's very good captive agents out there, but they are selling the exact same product as a guy 1.5 miles away, or a gal 2 miles down the road. Yeah. What is the difference between them and I in the grand scheme of things? Probably not a lot, right? And then it becomes, a much more difficult conversation and a much more difficult differentiation to make.
Yeah. How did you find CLI, and why were they the right fit for you?
Yeah, great question. Now, so just people who are listening who are not familiar with CLI or Canyonlands. Canyonlands, select agencies. There's an agency group based out of, they're out of Tempe now, Arizona. And they serve as kind of like an aggregator plus, I think of them in my mind. So we're able to give market access through them, but in a totally different model than what's out there. So
agreed.
To rewind and kind of give you an understanding of where I came from, when I started out scratch and had no contacts, as you kind of hinted at, we ended up going to a bunch of carriers directly, and the carriers tried to push us towards different aggregators. And I'm not going to talk about which aggregators we talked to, but let's just say we talked to a lot. And every one of those contracts, and being the legal background I had, it was never, for all these contracts, regardless of who I signed up with, it was never going to be about the marriage. It was going to be about the divorce. What does the end look like here? Because the end's the bloody part. The honeymoon should be nice in the opening. Like that should always be great. But the end is where the devil lives. And so I would look at all of the aggregator contracts and the independent of the other carriers. And I would say to myself, what's my out? If this doesn't go well, where am I going? And then what am I getting along the way? And for every one of them, they had a buyout or some kind of equity stake in my business. And then I'd ask, like, what are you doing to grow my business? Well, we give you access. Okay, besides access, what do you give me? Because I can get access by going splitting commissions to the guy down the street, right?
Yeah.
They would say, no, you just get access. You get access. Then we get some, maybe the idea of overrides after you produce a certain amount of business. And so I was like, well, this doesn't seem, the juice doesn't seem worth the squeeze. Like, this just seems like I grow under them. And as I grow, I get cinched, right? They keep getting deeper and deeper into my book. And if I truly want to be independent, that doesn't exist. And so I was actually doing a podcast with Nick Ayers where we interviewed Danielle Smink. And Danielle started talking about her aggregator and what the things and how their contract and arrangement works and what type of things they're available to them and how they work with their agents. And I was like, this sounds great. Danielle, let's talk about potentially, linking up. And they had only been in Arizona at that time. They were only in Arizona. This was back in 2017.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I walked into our coffee meeting because she was in Chicago meeting with Nationwide. And I walked into our coffee and said, Danielle, two things are going to happen at the end of this. I thought I was big deal. This is before I was thoroughly humbled by insurance. And I said, Danielle, you're either going to help me become part of your organization here, or I'm going to try and emulate what you did as if I could 2 years into the business. Right.
Oh, so you already, okay. That's what I was wondering, if you were already in the business. Okay.
I had ground 3 years. I had ground 2 years with 3 carriers. So I had access to just 3 carriers.
Okay.
And as any independent will tell you, that's not a lot of markets. Yeah. And that's a lot of no's. And don't get me wrong, no's are part of this game, right? Yeah. There's a lot of no's with only 3 carriers. And so I went to her and, she laughed and said, sure, let's make this work. And so I was actually I believe I was one of the first agencies outside of Arizona, and certainly the one first east of the Mississippi that they brought on.
How did she respond to that with your 1 or 2 things are going to happen?
She laughed. I mean, the reality is that, there's a lot of insurance people who are one-armed fishermen, right? They can walk into a room and they think they can walk on water. And so the reality was, I don't think she took offense. I think she thought it was kind of funny. And I knew it was a half promise anyway. The idea of just creating an aggregator as a solo scratch agency is a joke. But the reality was I just knew that having compared all the options that were out there, this was the place that I thought would be best suited for what I wanted to do. Yeah.
I would like to see Danielle's face when I love Danielle, and I think the world of her. So I agree with you. I think what she's created as an aggregator is second to none in the industry, in my opinion. So you definitely found a good home there. Yeah. So how was it in the beginning? So you, what was let me back up a little bit. Did your experience as an attorney help you, especially in the beginning, try to grow and sell insurance, because you had probably a deep understanding of what it is that you were working with?
Yeah. So I'd say no. It was super humbling. First off, we all know the feeling, right? We live in a marketplace. It's the only one I've ever seen in which the people who are advertising what we do, right, beat it down, right? They make it about the 15-minute conversation, the 15%. They actually devalue it. It'd be like Tesla being like, hey, we're an okay car, right? No other industries kind of really take that tenor with their product lines. They literally are trying, it feels like they're trying to commoditize them, right? And so what I would get into meetings with customers, they'd be like, this is overkill. Why am I waiting? I would do 30-minute presentations, 40-minute presentations, walking them through every line item on their insurance. And I still do that to some extent. But the reality is like most of them want in, out, done. Yeah. Because the reality is they think that this is a 2 or 3% chance, event. And they may be correct, but if you hit that 2 or 3%, you're going to want to know. And so that was the biggest problem I had, is that when I was an attorney and I told someone what to do, there was a pretty big gravitas. When I was an insurance agent who also was an attorney telling people what to do, they oftentimes hung the phone up and didn't call me back. Yeah. And so that was a super humbling part of it. But the reality is you just have to take the ego out. And this is actually something Danielle told me, and I use it all the time. is some will, some won't. Who's next? Like, you just have to move on, and you have to find that like the people who will value you will understand that you're giving them that time because it matters, not because you're just trying to sell them something.
So did you adjust then and try to strike that balance of, look, it's in my core to, to try and educate, what someone is buying. You mentioned earlier that you realized when you were practicing law that nobody knew what they were purchasing and what they had and what they were spending these large sums of money on. So it was important to you to, to educate them. But then you find out, I don't want to be educated.
Yeah.
I think there has to be a balance there. Did you try to adapt your process?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was what I did. I went to process, right? And I said, how do people want this delivered? Some people really valued those meetings. Okay. Some people didn't. How do I value my time in delivering those services to provide them both options? And so one of the things I looked for and actually implemented was I used a lot of the quote vids, like from Agent, Advisor Vault. So if you want to watch the video, it's there. I made it. You're ready for you. You can take the video, watch it or not. But you can also just click download the PDF, and you can pull up the PDF if that's the experience you want.
I like it.
I want to give them options to meet me where they want to meet. Yeah. And so when I looked at my customer experience, I said, it can't be about me. It's got to be about what they want. But I also have to make sure that I'm able to deliver what I think is right. So if they say, hey, Adam, you never told me. Yeah, I did. Look at the video that's still up and still available for you. I did do that. And so here's again, getting back to that some will, some won't, who's next. That's just the realities, right? Like you're not going to sell every client, nor do I want to. And a lot of times that process that we built for sales was a great way to weed out clients that weren't going to value what we would do. Like if you want that experience of like, I want it cheaper at all costs, no matter what, and I don't care, and I'll just figure it out if it goes bad. I'm not the agent for you. And that's okay.
Yeah.
There's other agents who will do that.
Yeah. So when you transitioned over, did you find that it was harder than you expected to be an independent agent, easier than expected, or about what you expected?
No, it was definitely harder. It was definitely harder. I mean, I went in with the hubris of a lawyer. I thought, man, if I tell people to buy this, they're going to buy it, right? Like they're going to hear from a lawyer. They have never had an experience when a person who's actually sued over a bodily injury claim or a personal injury claim, or knows the difference between those two, right? Told them what to do, right? Like no one who's seen $1 million cases. I worked on several, right? Like we've seen large cases. I've seen families be destroyed by car accidents. They'll take the UIM on the umbrella that I recommend to everybody. No, they don't. And so, I mean, I remember one particular instance where we had a carrier. I had sold the policy. The client had delivered a check, handwritten check they delivered. I went to issue the policy the next morning as I had promised them I would, because they didn't want me to issue it that day. And when I did, the policy jumped about $600 between the quote and the bind. I'd written all the reports. I called up the carrier. The carrier's like, nothing we can do. That's what our rating platform says. And I had to go back to the house. And I knew them. They lived like a block away. And give them the paperwork back, say, renew your current policies. I can't provide what I told you I was going to provide you before. And I left. And I remember this because I was like super frustrated, tired as you get, right? Like you're working till 2, 3 in the morning. And I was welling up in my tears. I'm like, what am I doing? Right? Like, what is this? What have I done? And the woman was like, I need another document. And she saw that I was upset. And she saw that I was like, there's no doubt she knew I was frustrated. That stuff sucks. Like that's the hard part, right? Everyone who sits there and thinks, business owners are always these intrepid people, staring into a howling wind. The reality is it's super humbling. Like you're just, the first several years, or even now, it's humbling at times. You just have to be like, yep, this is wrong, right?
Yeah. That's my biggest challenge to this day is not dealing with customers and the actual business, is dealing with the company issues. And they all have them. There's not one that's not immune to it, but stuff like that you cannot explain, that doesn't sound like BS, but you're telling the truth, and you're put in the middle, and you're the one that's in that. That's always a tough one to swallow.
It's super humbling. And I think that's one of the things I've loved about getting to know more agents is that you can tell the agents who, for lack of a better word, and I apologize, I'm not going to cuss, but it's on the line.
Yeah.
Give a damn.
Yeah.
Right. If you give a damn and you're an agent that gives a damn, you spend a hell of a lot more time listening to other agents than telling them how great you are. Right. And it's one of the things that I've sought out with no matter what agents I want is I like to talk to the quiet guy in the room. I like to talk to the one who doesn't tell me about his production first or her big month that she has. I want the one who's going to talk to me about the process they've built so that their team members can have what they want, that their clients feel heard and answered. I want to hear about the ones who have iterated and who have some scars.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that really drives me every day is not to your point, is not to worry about what we control. Because we really don't. We're all type A. If you start a business, you're probably type A,
Yeah.
right? You want to control the world, but letting go of some of the things we can't control and then really focusing on what we can to ultimately deliver better results. And that doesn't just mean revenue. That doesn't just mean premium. It means better results for the customer. It means better life experience for our teams, ourselves, as well as, hopefully growth overall in the business, right?
Yeah.
Those things are not mutually exclusive.
No. How did you grow in the beginning? Did you have relationships? Do you have, kind of center influences? How'd you make it?
Yeah. So, how I made it, fortunately, was I had a wife who worked and who was, fairly successful, and that takes some of the pressure off. Admittedly, I'm not going to lie about it.
Yeah,
It was a
right.
slow grind, as everyone kind of knows. If you're in insurance for a 3-year run, you shouldn't be in insurance, right? Like it's not a quick burn and churn.
No.
At least not if you really want to get the value out of those first 3 years, in my experience. Maybe I'm wrong, but I first off started by really thinking kind of different marketing strategies. So I would try to you start in personal lines because that's where as a scratch agency all I can get appointments. So I would go and I would bring cookies to open houses with my sticker on it. So people would hopefully they the smell of cookie sells the house. Maybe they take a cookie home. They let me quote the insurance. Like literally that's how small I was thinking. Like I'm going to do that kind of stuff. I'm going to build relationships with lenders and that kind of thing. And it went okay, right? It was decent. But one of the things I really learned from is I hunt fishermen, I don't hunt fish. And so because if you hunt just 1 or 2 or 3 deals a day because you're hunting the person that bought that house, or if you're trying to talk to that realtor who does 2 deals a month, we can't live off of that as insurance agents. The real estate agents may be able to pull off 2 or 3 a month and do great. We can't.
Yeah.
And so I would look for people in situations where we could connect on multiple. So a lot of times it was mortgage lenders. A lot of times it was in that space. And then since then, I've tried to develop relationships with people in the professional services realm because they tend to refer a lot more business that way. So financial advisors, and even other mutuals, like other companies, other people that don't do what I do, but are able to bring in groups of people at a time.
That's something that I've been pushing as from a relationship of, somebody that I met, at an innovation conference, is to work with the financial advisors and to really become a part of their team.
It's super smart. Sorry to interrupt, but it's exactly based. My door right here of my office is a financial advisory. So I literally office within a financial advisory, and they were essential in me getting off of the ground to the point of the fisherman. So they would walk clients of theirs down the hall and say, "You need to talk to this guy because we saw your insurance and he's telling us that's probably outside what you should be paying, right? Or you have a 250, a 2550 policy, and we know from your assets that you're way out of bounds, right?" And it's a great way for these financial advisors to really gain credentials with their customers, be like, and show that we're not just out getting your money in here. We're about making sure that you're protected in the overall sense. And they can demonstrate by saying, we're going to give you a great service person in our office, and we make nothing off of it. We make nothing but the relationship, but you're going to be able to be taken care of and understand your policies.
Yeah. And on their end, that's a part of their process is making sure their assets are protected properly and to put them with somebody they trust and they know who's going to have their best interest and cover them the right way. So it's a great partnership, and I wish, I mean, I wish a lot of things. I wish I would realize a lot of things earlier on in my career, but you just, they happen when they happen. Tell me a little bit about your team and the process of, building your agency and then getting them aligned with what your, vision is, and and how, because we all have our own process and what's important to us, whether it's organization or, here's how we make, here's how we communicate with customers after changes, what have you. What was that like for you of growing, and having, others work with you?
Yeah. So I think I built my agency to be remote. So this is before COVID. This is before any of this happened. I saw the value in having remote work.
Wow.
When I was a dad practicing law and I had to try and get home for my kids' events or whatever. And or I was at a court hearing and I'd have to drive into the city for an hour and a half, only to work an hour and a half and then drive an hour and a half back out. Right? Like, what are we doing here? And unfortunately, the offices we were working out of were very old school. And we're like, no, we want to see you down here every day. We want you here every week. And so I built my systems, everything to be from day one remote for me or for anybody else who's joining. We went about 2.5 years before I hired anybody. And my first hire, I was the luckiest guy in the world. She's been fantastic. She's been such a leader and has been a huge benefit to us. And so, one of my things is that I always try, if I have success doing something, I look back at how I got success and I keep doing that thing, right? Because I think that it's a function of success's process. And I can't control outcomes. I can control how I get to those outcomes, the lead indicators of that. So I did it once, found an outstanding team member, and then I did it again, and I found an outstanding team member. And those things were fairly basic. Like, I'm not going to say I was had a crazy idea. I looked local. I used things like Nextdoor to post the ads. I used Ideal Traits as a system to which I could collect it and be more efficient in how I kind of took those things in. I then often overlaid, and this has happened in subsequent, I've had iteration of this, but I overlaid, I wanted an intake survey. I wanted a logic test, right? I wanted to have like a personality assessment. Those are all things Ideal Traits will allow you to add on. And the reality between you and I is I didn't care what they got on the test. I didn't necessarily care about the personality outside of some outliers that were like big red flags, but I wanted to see they would do it, because I understand in our industry, it's not about, necessarily, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to sell insurance or to service insurance policies, but you got to be persistent as hell. You have to come in and make sure that you follow the process. But also, when the system says error in the website, you need to go back and be able to finish it and you're not turned off, right? So if you're going to go through the job interview process and you're going to go through these steps, these additional steps, and finish them, and I'd done them myself, I knew they weren't easy tasks to finish. And sometimes you'd have to refresh or go back. I wanted to see you got to the end of it, because it's that grit that's going to be actually determine whether you're going to be successful or not, right?
Yeah.
And so we've actually added through these processes, we've just hired our 4th person. Wow. It was our longest job search, because I've been looking for a salesperson to take over the personal lines for a while, just to kind of lead our personal division, because, wearing two sides of the wall, it gets a little, time shrinks.
Yeah.
And so we just added our 4th person using this process. And I'm nowhere without this team. They are fantastic. I'm so grateful to have every one of them. And they are part of every new person we add. So every new person we add, they have a role in that as well, so that we maintain that team and maintain that kind of level, that they have input on who they want to bring in as well.
Yeah, I like it. Are you still using Ideal Traits?
So we're not currently hiring right now, although we probably have a role we could fill. But I haven't just, as it goes with the summer and everything else, and being a dad, I haven't kind of delved into that. We just, like I said, hired the latest team member on August 1st. So,
and I'm sorry, did you use Ideal Traits for that, or a piece of it, or?
So I'm trying to think. That one came in through a referral.
Okay.
But I believe I had her do the Ideal Traits pieces, if I do recall. But yeah, I mean, like I said, ideal traits is a great way to kind of funnel those down. And that doesn't mean you don't have to just use ideal traits, but like that type of hiring software where we could have a little extra friction that they had to show that they weren't just clicking to submit. That's the one I wanted to root out. So just to give you our numbers on that, we had 900 applicants when we put out something. Like 10% finished the next two steps. Really? So 90% of the people who applied for the job ruled themselves out. Right? They didn't finish the application. I'm not. That's okay. This isn't the place for you. Yeah. Because I need to know you got to finish. You can finish multi-steps because that's, our process is on. As you know, policy changes and stuff, it's multi-step. It can be, put it into the system, make sure it carries through, show that it's in the policy, show that it comes in the download, check that, make sure, the carrier sees it. We go through all those steps, and that's not just one day. You got to kind of work through it.
Yeah. I asked because I just used Ideal Traits for the first time 6 months ago. I was so happy with it, the entire process and platform. You're right. And mine was more for a customer service person. But I did love that piece of it, that was them putting a little bit of stake in the game, and it gave you a lot of information. And you're right. I want to say that I had about rough numbers. I had about 60 applicants. About 30 of them filled out all the paperwork, which I know that took some time, 45 minutes. So, I was super happy with that entire process. Gave me a lot of information before I even had to contact somebody. And in this, workplace market, to actually have a selection of, people to choose from, I hadn't had that years.
Yeah, I think it like I said, it allows you, it gives you an invaluable tool of just kind of streaming them down, right? And like shrinking down that initial bulk going throughout all the applications it's a chore. Yeah. And if you can set some, and particularly in our industry, these are steps like the ability to fill out the logic test or to do the personality exam or whatever kind of layers you put onto it. The ability to have those there have real downstream effects on our business. And it is a test to see if do they have the ability to, like a technological ability to kind of go through and even realize that there's another level. They go through and figure these things out. Because a lot of times they'll just kind of click submit and they think it's over. Yeah. But that attention to detail is essential in what we do.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. What have some of your biggest challenges been as an agency owner?
So obviously, if you're owning a business, it's never big enough. It's never fast enough. Right. And there's a little bit of kind of grace that you have to learn to give yourself. Yeah. Because, if you're growing too fast, a lot of times that's where the devil gets you, right? The mistakes happen. And I'd rather be mistake free than massive. Although mistakes will happen. I'm not so proud to say that I don't make mistakes from time to time. I think the bigger piece is like, I do have a tough time with how we treat ourselves and how we're treated or we're seen. I'm not a big pride guy. Like I try to keep myself pretty grounded, but the reality is we do important things, and what we do matters when stuff hits the fan. Yeah. And I think a lot of times people don't necessarily understand that bit. And they also, on the other side of the flip of the coin is I think that we're oftentimes by our even business partners seen as a necessary evil or an overhead expense that they could easily get rid of had they just, if they could just have massive call centers and direct advertising. And the reality is that we are an essential piece to letting people feel comfortable, confident, to making the public understand not only the struggles right now that carriers are going through, right, and comfortable with these carriers as they go through those struggles, but also making the individuals understand and our ultimate clients understand that like insurance companies aren't here to be a roof warranty policy. They're here to be insurance for things that are sudden, accidental, unexpected. And the fact that your roof is 40 years old and needs to be replaced is not something that that insurance should be paying for. No, should you be looking for insurance to do that, right? And so we are in some ways a very important arbiter, a very important messenger, and a lot of times, both sides of our sales equation see us as just a middleman who's pushing paper, and that's difficult for me because that's frustrating because I do think we really provide a ton of value and a ton of insight and a ton of confidence, and And when we see other, when we see agencies who take advantage of that confidence, right, whether from the customer or from the carrier, as some do, by manipulating applications so that price is lower for customers and they win business, it only makes it harder for us to really stake our value in the transaction. And that frustrates me, because you just sit there and go, why are we diminishing ourselves when what we do is so important?
Yeah. Well put. What's it like for you to now be a leader of a growing company? We start out by ourselves, and we're gonna grow it, and we're gonna crush it, and we have this driven mentality. And then I feel like we kind of backpedal into being this business owner and leader of other people. And that was something personally that I struggled with as we grew. Now you have you have 4 people. And for me, when I added my 5th person is when I really started to realize that I was spending so much more time on our team, and like, oh, I need an HR person. I can't afford an HR person, but that's what I need. What's that been like for you to grow as a leader of a business?
To be honest, I think it's been really cool. Like I get excited by it. The reality is, like, when I started this up, the goal was to be an entrepreneur. The goal wasn't to be an insurance agent, right? Necessarily. Although I saw true value in it, right? But the reality, again, you gotta, and this is one of the great things that Danielle's a great mentor about, is she can give you insights into these types of things. And it's not just about production. It's about how you building your business, how you scaling your business, how you growing your business, how you iterating on that business plan to make sure that you can sustain and grow your business. Like, you can't, and I keep going back to a phrase that my friend tells me, and I've heard it many places, but he says, you can do anything, you can't do everything. And the reality is that the everything portion of this needs to be delegated.
Yes.
And I had a really good friend, and a couple of good friends who have told me about the traction elevator delegate experiment, right? Like, you have to go through your day and say what things are elevating this business, making it better, growing it, pushing it forward, and what things are pulling you back, and then delegate those that are holding you back. Either you like it or you love it. If you're not liking it or love it, you better be great or good at it. If you're not any of those 4 things, get it on somebody else's plate, because otherwise you're holding yourselves back, and you're holding your team back.
Yeah.
And so I try and do that. It's not easy, because there is a level of ego you have to run a business and say, I do this better than others. But the reality is that you have to learn to let it go. Otherwise, you're never going to grow in this thing. And then you should go work for somebody else and be a producer. If you really love selling policies, great. But there's a higher calling for people who really want to be entrepreneurs and run a business. And that's okay to admit, like, hey, I just want to sell policies. That's awesome. There's no shame in that game.
No.
But to your point about the HR and all that other stuff, that's what you have to sign up for. If you want to scale and grow it. Because there's some people can have a $1 million book and make their, $550,000 or $75,000 and feel good about that's awesome. Like, be happy about it. That's one of the other things, just not to go too long about it. But that's one of the things I hate about our industry, is that somehow we determine an agent's value by his book size. Right? Like, the fact that a person only has a $2 million book makes them itty bitty. And that their value, their opinion is somewhat diminished because they're only at a $2 million or $1.5 million or even $1 million book. It doesn't mean, to me, it doesn't necessarily mean, because you could make a choice to say, I don't want it to be larger than this. I want it to be manageable. I want to have personal relationships. And the other thing is that someone could be in an industry where they're making $500,000 premiums on one policy, or you could be in a market where your average auto is $4,000, and you got just in the Midwest where our average premium is maybe $1,200 to $1,500 a year. Well, that's not equitable. And your book being 3 times the size of mine doesn't necessarily mean you're a better salesperson than I am, or a better agent than I am. So I think that we have to break down a little some of that piece too, to be like, it's all about book size. It's all about, no, it's not. It's about who you are as an agent, what ideas you can offer, what you share, what you give, and how you kind of treat your clients, or ultimately, run that book. that is a better idea than, just because, how much premium you drive in a given year.
Yeah. I've had people ask me, or I think we've all been asked, how what do you want? How big do you want to get? You know what? I don't put a dollar amount down anymore. At first I started saying, I want to be great. And I want to be great in every aspect. And I want to be a place where people like to come to work and they're happy. And I'm still defining what great is. And for me, I'll probably never get there in my eyes, because it's always going to be something, but that's something I'm, constantly working on. It's just refining, everything process and, how we can, how I can be a better employer and a better leader. I am infatuated with becoming a better leader. And
I love that.
Yeah. And which is until I started to, which I'm just, develop myself and reading books and listening to others. And one way that I learned that I was growing, that what I get the most out of was just connecting with other people in the industry, which is kind of what this podcast was spawned. Really, I enjoyed, and I got so much from connecting from others in the industry. Not only did I learned, it gave me energy. It was inspiring, and so I figured, why don't we do it on camera?
I think it makes a ton of sense. No, I agree with you 100%. And I actually have 3 points I want to bring up. One thing you just said is that, and I think you're exactly right, is that you are playing an infinite game. You want to be great, right? And like, that is not a finite thing. If somebody says, I want to get to 10 million, well, there's a point where they reach that. Right. And then what's the point? If you've reached that goal, that doesn't say numbers don't matter. Let's look, I'm a capitalist just like everybody else.
Yes.
Numbers matter. I got to pay bills. I got to stay in black ink. Let's keep going. But the reality is that when you play an infinite game, nothing in the short term necessarily keeps you from keeping on. Right. And so there's that mindset of just kind of saying like, this is never over. Great is never necessarily something you attain. And the one thing I love to say to my kids all the time is when you're good at something, you have to tell everybody. When you're great at something, everyone tells you. So seek to the point where you're not having to tell anybody about what you do or how great you are at what you do. You just do what you do, and the greatness people will come back and reflect it to you. Yeah. And that is that's a way better barometer for me. And like I said earlier we were talking, like, I don't seek out people to tell me how great they are, because they have literally in that moment invalidated their thesis. If you tell me how great you are, great people don't have to tell you. Good people tell you how good they are. Yeah. Great people just do it, and everyone realizes their greatness.
Yeah, nice.
And then the last thing I would say to you about to what you were getting at is that 100% agree. And actually, what I did a podcast throughout COVID. Literally every day at noon, where we would talk to local business owners, where we'd do the same thing. And you're 100% right. During COVID, it was just it kept you going, right? It kept me going. Now, couldn't keep that up afterwards, and so we kind of fell off on doing those every day. But the reality is there's a ton of energy that comes out of finding similarities and people who are aligned, especially business owners across channels and across geographic areas, who are seeking that horizon as opposed to some monument. Just keep it going. It's the way to be, in my opinion.
Agree.
Because I say the same thing. People are like, what size you want to get to? Where would you sell? Like that. I'm not here for that. It's about me being able to establish keep getting better and keep pushing towards something, right?
Don't we run, and I never want to stop growing, and I'm driven to do that, and how we do that. But now, as from a leadership standpoint, and how do we grow together? Is the way. Again, now that you're growing your team, how are you spending most of your time?
So I'm fortunate where I developed my team in such a fashion that they are fairly independent. So I've been lucky because they're at home. We don't have a lot of inter-office kind of interactions, and that there's a downside to that. But the upside to that is that we've set it up. It's set up in such a way where we have redundancies and checkpoints among one another as team members. right? And most of the checkpoints are on me to keep me honest and keep me working and not getting too distracted by the next shiny object. But I find a lot of admittedly, I probably need to be better about checking in more regularly, but my team pretty much runs automated, and it's great. It's because they're such a fantastic group. But I spend my time more so looking for what I said earlier, looking for the fishermen. So building relationships and trying to drive situations where we can succeed in larger groups. And then now I'm like, to my, I've been fortunate in that those have been successful relationships. And then now I have to kind of scale to them, right? Because I'm, and so I can make it a little more efficient. But to your point, as I get higher, I'm going to have to get more invested in doing more of the HR and the check-ins. But as of right now, we're fairly manageable.
Yeah,
and I can balance the sales with the sales and growth with the kind of team support. Maybe I'm wrong. They'd probably tell me if I was.
It's easy to get away from, especially being remote. Of not checking in. I believe that I've gotten better at it, and in order to do that, you have to be intentional about it, and I have to schedule it. And if I don't, then it's just too easy to go by. I think for me, and this is something I erred on a little bit, was that I did kind of just let our team run itself, and sometimes you miss things. Then you don't know when somebody's maybe unhappy or things are going a little bit south. It's just it often means a lot to them, that even if you're just checking in personally. Yeah. I got this from another agent friend of mine, who she does it. She calls it Friday 15th. She checks in every 15 minutes. And so it's an expectation that she's set, and we're going to check in. And sometimes we're talking about personal, or sometimes we're talking about an account. It's just, you get 15 minutes with me. I'm sure it goes longer than that sometimes, but I think that's so important. Just to keep your finger on the pulse of the agency.
Yeah. I'm actually writing it down, because the reality is that, as you hold up this mirror, it is something I need to get better on. Admittedly, and we do this as we're trying to build for or move towards that horizon, right? Or get towards great. You kind of look, you don't look right or left. You keep looking forward, right? And you kind of got to figure out who's alongside you.
Yes.
And if they're still there.
The first time that I started doing that and scheduling it, and I had one of my staff, she's like, "About what?"
That's the issue. You're like, "Oh no, what are we talking about?"
I just want to talk to you. So, last question before we let you go. How do you level up your business from here? How do you get to that? How do you get to that next level where you want to be?
Yeah. Well, I think so we just implemented somebody into being kind of our director of personal lines. She's got tons of experience. She's more experienced than me in the personal line space, right? She's done this. She actually managed her own book for a while. So she has a ton of skills, and granted, I've learned from her sometimes, right? You bounce things off about what you want it to be. But the reality is we don't have a lot of youth, right? We don't have a lot of young agents in my office, unfortunately. And so what I really want to start, showing people the lifestyle you can have, particularly parents. You can build a really great lifestyle in insurance and have a lot of autonomy, right? We don't have a ton of these burn the midnight oil emergencies. Like, if the house is on fire, we can't do anything anyway, right? So you can develop and create, as long as you are in for that early grind, a really nice lifestyle in insurance. And I would love to see producers and bring producers on to allow them that ability to grow and develop, and show them that this is actually as a flexible work life. You do not need to be in an office. You can get out and meet people. You can build relationships that last 10, 15, 20 years, and you can do really cool stuff. And it doesn't have to be a passion, right? Everyone's like, I love this. I don't know if you're a Scott Galloway fan, but I'm a big fan of his. And he always talks about, everyone tells everyone to follow their passion. And admittedly, insurance is not a lot of people's passion, right? Let's just be frank about it. But the person who tells you to follow the passion probably has billions of dollars already anyway. And it's their BS way of saying, like, do what you want to do. But the reality is they didn't get to the billions because they followed their passion.
Correct.
They got to the billions because they figured out what they did well, and then they doubled down and worked really hard at it. Right.
Yeah.
And if you're a person who can show empathy and give information and share stories and can talk to someone about the how a policy can ultimately help them, you could do wonders in insurance. And that's the next step for me leveling up, is finding those, trying to tap into people and getting them excited about, because if you talk to someone about selling insurance policies, they don't care. But if you talk about protecting their neighbors or being there for them when the worst stuff happens, there's a lot of people who would sign up for that.
Yeah.
And that's what we do.
Yeah. That plays right into, I just got done reading a book, 10 times is easier than 2 times. I don't know if you've read that, but it targets who, not how. And that's the way that you scale, is by who you work with and hire, and not necessarily how you do it, because you can't do it all yourself. And you reference, you're in a position you're in because of your team. And that's true of all of us. So.
100%.
Hey, I'm going to get this thing wrapped up. This has been great. A lot of great information in here. Thanks for doing this. Really can't wait to meet you at Innovation. See you there. Shake your hand. Maybe have a beverage. But everyone else, thank you for joining another episode of the Agents to Owners podcast. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Seth.
Yeah.